Hey gang, welcome back. And we're going to build a little bit on our cybernetics lecture and sort of introduce the rudimentary aspects of family mapping, in particular related to genogramming. We'll get into that more. We'll get into this in more detail next week. But I wanted to make an attempt at least to try to put some flesh around what we talked about in cybernetics video. So as you'll notice here, I have created sort of a very rudimentary 3-generational sort of family map in sort of genogram style terms. Over here I have delineated square indicates a cisgender man, a circle indicates a cisgender woman, a square with a circle inside of it indicates a transgender person, female to male. This is, of course, transgender person, male to female. And there's also a designation for members who are bisexual. This is a cisgender bisexual man. This is a cisgender bisexual woman. And of course, you can make modifications as necessary. The lines here indicate types of relationships and boundaries. Okay, so when there's a line, there's a sort of just a basic relationship. So in this case, we have two adult cis man, adult cis woman. We can say that they are married, they're connected in some way. This is in the executive generation, right? We can have sort of the grandparents and the consulting generations also be connected. And so that's one way of delineating. Now, you will also see children delineated this way. Okay, you'll have sort of a link between two partners and then lines down to their offspring. When there is a particularly close relationship, you might add a second line, okay, to indicate closeness. And so we'll say that dad here is close with his mom, and mom here is close with her mom. Okay, these are relatively, common sort of constellations of relationships. When you have 3 lines, that's a sign for enmeshment, right? We mentioned before that there have been signs of enmeshment between myself and my own mother, right? Things that I do that are not intended to have any influence upon her evoke very strong feelings for her. A line with a slash through it indicates some type of broken relationship. So oftentimes if there's a divorce, so we'll say here in this case, this set of grandparents has been divorced. Relatively common. When there is a squiggly line, it indicates conflict, right? So in this case, maybe we'll say that we have some sibling conflict happening, okay, in the learning or the child generation. And then when you have a dotted line going between figures, it indicates distance. So we'll say the parents in the executive generation feel distant from their fathers in this sort of scenario, okay? Now, we talked a little bit about roles, and relationships, right? So, I suppose what I'm getting at is that, at least in one way of describing these generations is by their role, right? This is a consulting generation. Their role is to be available as consultants to the executive generation, which is in charge of guiding the learning generation through their developmental stages and supporting everyone's growth, development, and flourishing. Other roles could be, who does work. Inside the home and outside the home. This is also related to the division of labor. In a household, the division of resources. That could also be related to different rules, like who gets access to what resources, who gets access to what time, who gets access to what food, who gets access to the television and the remote control, and at what time of day, right? There's also rules about where people can be together with others, by themselves, whatever the case may be. And sometimes the boundaries around those things can be overly rigid or overly permeable or flexible, right? So in a family where no one closes the door while they're going to the bathroom, you might have questions about the permeability of the family's boundaries related to privacy. And then there are times when, by necessity, based on a family's specific variables and characteristics, that flexibility between the generations is absolutely necessary. So, let's say, for example, that you're working with a family who has immigrated to your area in the United States, and the executive generation does not speak English well, but the learning generation is fluent in English. This is a very common sort of constellation of factors, especially in Appalachia and other parts of the country where the economy is based on sort of farming. It's an agrarian community. So you'll have workers who immigrate from Spanish-speaking countries, Central America, Mexico, South America. They'll come here seeking opportunity and to perhaps escape hardship. And their children will be sort of caught in this dynamic where they're the people who are learning and need assistance from the big people, but the big people need their assistance too. Like, say, for example, they go to a parent-teacher conference. Can they understand what the teacher's trying to say to them? Oftentimes, that's something that a child would not necessarily be at, but they may have to be there and take up some responsibility in the executive arena so that messages can be communicated from the teacher to the parent, so that the parent can then, under ideal circumstances, carry out their executive functioning for the learning generation. Now, sometimes because of this dynamic, the roles, especially between these generations, can feel blurry, right? And that can lead to conflict between the generations. And oftentimes that will be something that you will be dealing with in your office. Something similar might happen, like say the parent under those circumstances has to go to the doctor, right? That under normal circumstances, in a situation where they speak sort of fluently the common language of their environment, of their area, their child wouldn't be there, right? There's lots of things that are related to an adult's health that a child doesn't need to be privy to. But the child may have to be there in order to facilitate the parent's understanding. I think an example of this that comes to my mind is in the movie, why is it escaping me at the moment? The Coda, the movie Coda, that won Best Picture, right? If you've seen it, and I hope I'm not spoiling it in any way, the younger child, the daughter, who is hearing, and the parents are deaf, the child must go to a doctor's appointment with the parents, and it's very awkward. And certainly I highly recommend you see the movie. this is a movie that shows a family handling the unique circumstances of having a family with members that are hearing impaired and who have functioning hearing, and the variables and the difficulties they are charged with handling. They handle it in very inspiring ways, sort of restores faith in humanity to a certain degree. But you can see how a family's diverse circumstances are likely to influence how the rules, roles, and relationships are sort of carried out. What are the requirements for rigidity and permeability and flexibility within the boundaries? What's required in terms of flexibility related to hierarchy? And what are the ways in which we as therapists can support a family dealing with their own nuances in ways that allow for parents to function at their best in the executive sort of realm, consult with their own parents. They are sort of the parents' own resident experts on how to raise a family. And then also the learning generation needs to be consulting with the older generation, especially enter into adolescence. The parents, ideally, are the children's best connection to adulthood and the best guides through childhood and adolescence into independent adulthood. Now, let's say, for example, we have members in this generation, okay, who, let's say they have an intellectual disability. Perhaps they were born with an intellectual disability, or perhaps they had a traumatic brain injury, and that impacted their ability to carry out their role in the executive generation, right? How is the family going to go about accommodating these new challenges? This is the purview of the family therapist, to understand what are the strengths, what are the nuances and challenges and changes in the one generation's functioning, and how can we collaborate with the family to rearrange and strategize their rules, roles, and relationships so that they can support each other's functioning and flourishing, relieve suffering as much as possible under their unique circumstances. As I'm looking at this, I'm sure I'm leaving out some really important stuff, but I hope you'll catch the main gist of these 3 videos in this module. These lay the groundwork for what every family therapist kind of had operating in their background system of their neurological hard drive, okay? When you are encountering a client, you are wondering about the cybernetic factors, the developmental factors. You understand things from a general point of view, and they can provide the specific details and circumstances, and you can work with them on the nuanced strategies for helping them adjust to their current reality, right? More often than not, pathology is the result of a family system concern, and when we can make adjustments in the system, we can find the flaws and make adjustments in the system, the pathology oftentimes will, if nothing else, if not resolved, then be relieved, right? So say you're working with a family with a child with ADHD, right? We're not necessarily going to change the ADHD, but we can maintain sort of a closeness between the parents and the child so that the child sees them as a reliable guide and will seek out their counsel when they face a challenge they can't quite solve themselves. Now, as I made those lines, something occurred to me that I want to make sure that I go over with you. Another thing that is likely to show up in your work as a family therapist is this common relational arrangement of the relationship triangle, okay? Now, You may have heard of this already, right? This is a relatively common term in our daily vernacular, okay? But I think what's important to recognize is that triangles in and of themselves are inevitable and are of no sort of value in and of themselves, okay? What I mean by that is they're not good or bad, right? They just are. And triangles can be leveraged for good, and they can be leveraged for relieving suffering and supporting well-being. They can also be used to cause suffering for specific members of the family, while perhaps in a counterfeit way empowering others. So, one example that's relatively common, okay, maybe let's see, a triangle between, well, let's stick with a good one first, okay? So triangles essentially are the allegiance between two members, and that allegiance communicating something to a third member, okay? So a healthy triangle, okay, would be a strong parental collaboration, okay, as it relates to a child, right? So sometimes children do things that in their naivete or their attempts to kind of test boundaries may sort of serve to sort of attempt to split or leverage one parent against another, right? You've heard like, Dad, Mom said I could go over to Susie's house and stay out till 11, right? And so Dad says, okay, no problem. But Mom didn't say that, right? And so you've got sort of that's almost kind of a feign, a counterfeit triangle that gives Dad the sense that, this has already been endorsed. And then come to find out that that's not the case. Now, in a case where you have a strong parental bond, there would be sort of a request from the child, let me talk it over with your mother, let me talk it over with your father, and we'll get back to you, right? And then you deliver a yes or no and perhaps a rationale for why that helps the child understand what's going on. That is the use of an allegiance between two members, right, who are using their adult brains to think something through and make a reasonable and developmentally reasonable decision for and or with their child. Okay. Now, it's also possible, okay, for especially when there's conflict between parents, okay. So perhaps they have a relationship, but it is a conflictual one, right? And then this child makes a request, okay, that the parent grants without discussing with the other parent, and the other parent has a difference of opinion. That can serve to then create more intensive conflict between the partners, and may also come back to messages sent from this parent to this child that then support conflict here, okay? Sort of a classic way that this shows up is in families that have divorced parents, and a child is essentially, you may have a parent who talks bad about the other parent in front of the child, right? And that sort of loops or kind of pulls the child into an allegiance with the complaining parent against the parent being complained about, because, and this is sort of an implicit message of sort of cybernetics. The child is put in a position where if they don't align with the complaining parent, they risk being sort of alienated and cut off from necessary resources, right? So if it may be the case that the child feels like they're kind of in a double bind. They don't have a choice but to align with the parent that's complaining, because if they don't align with the parent that's complaining, that's going to lead to conflict with the complaining parent and could lead to adverse consequences for the child. It's a very classic sort of way in which a triangle can undermine a family's functioning. And so we want to be very careful about understanding where the triangles are in family relationships. How are they being used to support or undermine the family's functioning, and sort of make adjustments, help the family make adjustments so that those triangles can be used more in supportive ways rather than destructive or undermining ways. So, all that to say, so we've talked about sort of the basic theoretical framework for family systems. We've covered cybernetics, right, and the ways in which families communicate explicit and implicit organizing messages through feedback loops. And we talked about sort of the ways in which they can show up in a family map. This is why we use family mapping, to sort of try to illuminate them, right? This all serves the purpose of helping you as the therapist then help the family to see, name, and then change the family patterns that have sort of led to the concerns that have motivated the family to seek assistance, right? That's essentially the goal of family therapy. See it, name it, change it, right? Every model of family therapy that we're going to go through this term will have their own take on how to best assist with the see it, name it, change it process, right? And keeping in mind too that when we see it, name it, and name it, doesn't necessarily lead to changing it, right? It is not our job, okay? In fact, it is probably undermining our own efforts if we are to work to fix a family's problems for them, right? In fact, that's contraindicated, right? Because essentially you embed yourself in their system, and then when you are removed from their system, things fall back to a homeostasis that could be either the same or worse than when they came to your office, right? Because then you are no longer embedded in the system. It is our responsibility to help the family change their problem-solving mechanism, right? Help them to see, name, and change their own patterns in ways that they can sign up for mutually and find a mutually satisfying solution to the way that they're living their life. Keeping in mind too that it's rarely what is going on that is the problem, but how it's happening. That's the problem. Our focus as therapists is less about what's happening and more about how it's happening. We can have more of an effect on how families go about solving their problems. And then they are going to be able to take their own expertise about their own set of variables and circumstances and strategize and operationalize those strategies in ways that are more likely to be long-term successful. So we will stop here for now. Looking forward to seeing you again in module number 2 as we begin to kind of discuss further family mapping and help introduce you to your part 1 of your signature assignment, which is your own personal 3-generational genogram. Thank you, and we'll see you back here real soon.